So welcome to the Photo Brigade Podcast, our first video podcast that we're live streaming. David's getting the link out to his people.
But my peeps. Both of them.
Both of your peeps. But before I actually start this Photo Brigade Podcast, I'll let you know my name's Robert Caplin. I am a photographer based in New York City. I started the Photo Brigade some years back, and it's a resource for freelance photographers to sort of network and share their work. And I've been doing these podcast series, all audio until now, and with thanks to Adorama and their event space, which we're in right now, they've actually built us this nice studio with these nice Rode broadcast microphones that were provided by Rode. And so I just want to give a big thanks to Adorama TV, Adorama Event Space, Rode Microphone. So also a big thanks to Tenba Bags. They've also been a big supporter of what we do. David was just showing off his new camera bag, which is beautifully equipped to not just carry camera gear, but also cookies, and he even has a spoon, all sorts of different stuff. So check out.
A spoon holder is very key.
Check out temba.com, and if you want to get a discount there, it's 10%. Use promo code Photo Brigade. Also, I want to also throw out just NPPA. I don't know if you're a member of NPPA.
Only for about 43 years.
And, I am too. They're a great organization, and I'm really trying to plug the different photography organizations these days. So go check out nationalpressphotographersassociation.com. You can get a discount by getting sponsored by a member these days. If you want, you can use Photo Brigade. If you want to give your promo code out, you actually save, I think, like 15% or something on your annual fee when people sign up using your code. Also, we're going to be starting a YouTube page, which this will be living on once it's done recording. So I encourage you all to subscribe to this YouTube page. You can also subscribe to Adorama TV on YouTube right now if you're watching through Adorama TV. And then lastly, to our friends at Photo Shelter, who have also been an amazing support to what we've been doing. And check out their website, photoshelter.com, and their Beam platform's really pretty great.
I'll just say this. I was on a train this morning, and I was trying to find some pictures, and I linked up to my own Photo Shelter page and got into image search. It's really an amazing. It's like having a little library on wheels that's always in the or like a little wagon that you're dragging behind you.
And I've actually heard that they're going to be incorporating a new app soon enough where you can just easily navigate all of your archives and send them to clients much easier than currently you can.
They need
through
to
mobile.
fix the download button so that it isn't 5 clicks, but but when you think about the ability to get a picture so
while
quickly,
you're on the train, which is it truly
even
is
at home,
or anywhere in the world. That's a big deal.
That's great.
So for everyone just joining us, thank you for all of you that actually have come to our live taping. But I have David Burnett here, who is a world-renowned photojournalist. I met you. I probably don't remember this. I met you first when you spoke at Ohio University when I was a student.
Wow, really?
About 10,
out of the 12. Barn.
Out of the barn, yeah. Right. Well, we had a gallery exhibit opening at the Dairy Barn, which was showcasing the work of the photography students at OU. So I've always been inspired by your work since then, and I know that I've been pinging you through Facebook for the past year, I guess, about doing a podcast, and finally got you to come in.
Here we are. Yes.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you for coming, David's had this amazing background for the past, I'd say, 40-ish years. You've been covering all of the presidents, all of the Apollo mission astronauts you've done portrait series on, correct?
Most, not all. But
but not all. You've also photographed all the launches? Is that the deal?
No, I've done a few. I did do. I just found yesterday, I was looking through this old cardboard box that really, the box itself should probably go in the Smithsonian. And in it, these 4 shoe boxes. My mother, who I never really considered to be in the same category as Imelda Marcos, but she bought just enough shoes, usually from Geppetto, these little blue boxes, that I could put my negatives in. And I still have them in these boxes from about 1964, 65, 66.
And how have your negatives held up?
Well, the negatives are actually in pretty good shape. The real issue was that, like most young, impetuous photographers, I wanted them to dry quicker. So as soon as I dip them in photo flow and hang them up, I would take my fingers and go,
yep.
like
you still
that.
got
Thereby,
those marks.
those scratches will never go away.
You know, I think I noticed a photo of yours that was shot on film that looked like it had some sort of, I forgot what the word was, like reticulation.
Reticulation, yeah, there's a bit of that. That was, it's amazing that you say that, because I had one roll of film my sophomore year of college, 1965, that I...
Dating yourself.
I'm no one else would date me, so I have to date myself. The picture of Connie Clay, the cheerleader, and it was a nice picture, but I'd put it in hot D76 to speed it up, and just like totally reticulation. I'm not sure I even kept the roll of film, but
you can call that artsy.
Nowadays you could probably find the anti-reticulation filter in Lightroom and clean it up. But
so since we're talking about your past, let's sort of. I always like to talk about how my guests have kind of gotten into the photo industry. I remember you talking at Photo Shelter's Luminance, which they do yearly or almost yearly, about starting in the yearbook, which is what I did in high school.
I think a lot of people started in high school, and it was either going to be on the high school paper or, in my case, in your case, the yearbook. And it started at the end of sophomore year, so I was 10th grade, 15 years old, and my mother was kind of like, you need some extracurricular activities if you're going to get into a good college. And she'd gone to Stanford as a journalism major, and so that was kind of what I was shooting for, the legacy of a Stanford graduate. And I signed up for the yearbook, and it came down. I still remember filling this thing out, 1962. Business staff, literary staff, art staff, photo staff, and I kind of like the first three held nothing for me. And the photo stuff, I guess I could try that, and I checked that off. And I was brought in with 2 or 3 other guys, what became my junior year, and like that first week in September of 62, going into the dark room with Mr. Blackham, the math teacher, and he was like, well, today he was a giant man, and he had trouble breathing, and so it was like having a lab session with Jabba the Hutt.
Oh, okay.
And you're kind of like, today we're doing the French Club. But amazingly, I'm kind of looking around like a wide-eyed kid with the red safe lights on, and I see the cone of light come out of the projector, and then he takes this white piece of photobromide paper and puts it in the deck towel, and that was the moment of alchemy magic that just I think has hit everybody who is of a generation where chemistry was ahead of pixels.
Right.
You remember those first few pictures coming up and the amazing factor that you're just like, oh my God, look at that magic. It is magic.
It really is. It's truly the most amazing thing. And I actually started, believe it or not, with color negatives, sneaking them into the dark room.
That's
just
tough.
To try it, just to like, oh, how does this work? They didn't turn out great, but just seeing that magic happen.
But you understood, within about 10 minutes, you understood the chemistry and physics of light in a way that you couldn't do in a semester of physics classes. That was, and this is what I contend that the sort of the under 30 or under 35 generation, most of whom have probably never even seen a roll of film. If you're 30, you might have had a couple of rolls of film when you were 6. But
I'm 32.
Yeah.
I've seen a few rolls in my day, but I was the first student at OU to go digital.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives you an idea. It was right around that time that you came to OU was when we were going to digital.
Well, and the thing was, it was just about in 2000 and 2 or 3 or 4 that it started to become available. So if you look at maybe the last 10, 12 years, but in terms of something that you would use on an everyday basis, if you're under 30, you probably just went right to some crappy little digital camera and then a next pretty good little camera.
Right.
And then 5 years ago, you got your first phone. And film just got sidecarred on the track of photography. And the thing that I think is unfortunate, and I would throw this out to Mr. Ira Block, who's been shooting pictures almost as long as I have, or maybe even longer. What do you think you lose by not ever having understood the concept of what a negative is about? And that less is more, and clear is black, and black is clear.
Yeah.
There's something that goes along with that, I think, in your thinking, and your understanding of exposure and all these things that you had to basically do manually. Even if you had a light meter, there was no automatic anything. I mean, your camera might go on an automatic setting, but you had to, at some point, you had to understand what that meant. And nowadays, you can pretty much get along without it. Now you can just concentrate on what it looks like.
Right.
But there was a craft involved there for the first 150 years of photography that is, I think, at risk of going away or being, being shelved by the vast elements of humanity. Now, what may happen is that having removed that craft element, we may be creating the greatest generation of visual artists ever because they didn't have to be encumbered by it. But I think, as somebody who lived through it, like you did, that I think there was really something to be gained by not knowing if you had a picture. If you looked on the back of your old Canon AE1, the only thing that was on the back was the little thing that held the film holder and said Kodachrome. It didn't tell you anything. So you lived with the uncertainty that you even had a picture. And
it made you even so much more want to see those negatives and scratch them, with your fingers like you did.
Right. No, I mean, and whether, in all those years I was doing magazine work from the early 70s on through about, the early aughts, you never knew if you had a picture. You'd send the film in, and it would be a couple of days.
That must be the hardest thing.
Or a week, or sometimes weeks before you even knew if you had a picture.
Right.
And somebody else, in almost every case, and at least in my case, somebody else would do the edit. So you had to have gotten a picture that somebody who maybe knew intellectually, they may have known something about whatever the project or the story was.
Right.
But the picture had to speak to them without you being able to stand over their shoulder and tap them on the shoulder and say, the one of Monica Lewinsky sipping the martini. That's the picture.
Yeah, you got to have that intuition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you started in high school. When did you start becoming a professional? Did you go for school for it?
No, I was. I really started out from about 8th or 9th grade on. I was part of that post-Sputnik generation. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to build rockets. I wanted to go to the moon. I was a math major for a couple of years, and then my sophomore year of college, I had a calculus professor who mumbled.
Oh.
And that I suspect has probably spelled the end of more math majors than almost anything else, because calculus needs to really be understood. You can't understand. You need to hear it. Anyway, so I ended up in poli-sci, political science. But all the while, I knew by senior year of high school, that's what I wanted to do. I started out by the next year in high school, by senior year, I was selling pictures to the local newspaper.
Nice.
Friday evening, generally speaking, I would find out where the Salt Lake Tribune was not sending a photographer. I'd go to that game, shoot a roll of 120 with my Yashica mat.
120, nice, yeah.
Potato masher strobe. Take my roll of film, get in the car, drive downtown. They'd soup the film. They'd maybe make 1 or 2 prints.
Yeah.
They'd give us back a fresh roll of film. So basically now I was even.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they ran it, they would put my name on it and send me $5.
$5, hey.
So I
think I was at 20
it was never as much fun as it was senior year of high school.
But you know what? All that is such practice. My senior year of high school, I did the same thing. I was working for the local paper there in Athens. I was in Athens, Athens, Ohio.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to hear that you had this same sort of, and you shooting games, shooting sports.
Shooting games, and I thought I was this great sports photographer, and I go back and I look at these pictures now, and they are hideous, but at least I was
I bet you were better than anyone else out there at the time.
But I say this is what I always... My real takeaway on all of this, especially for young photographers or people starting out who are committed to photography, and as I did, maybe they thought they were going to be the best sports photographer ever. Don't become so involved in what you think you have to do as a story for Sports Illustrated, or I want to do something that will really impress the Time or the Newsweek or the Huffington Post editors. Don't give up the pictures around your own life and those personal experiences that you have, in favor as I did. I was just like, I did one after another. Ended up at Colorado College. I photographed every Colorado College football game, ice hockey game. Nobody really cared about Colorado College football except a few of my fraternity brothers who were on the team. It was not like it was ever going to be a great program doing great things. It was fun, and it was a great way to get people out on a Saturday cheering in that old rah-rah kind of 1930s way. But the pictures I didn't bother taking because I was so focused on that, of the frat brothers sitting around playing bourrée at the big round table in the living room before lunch, or goofing off with the fraternity dog, and like getting him to climb up and down the stairs and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the pictures. The pictures that are right next to you, the pictures that are the moments of your own life, those are the pictures to count on and to not miss, because that, in 20 or 30 or 50 years, those will definitely be the moments that you're glad that you had some reference of. I can remember these things that I didn't do in high school and college because I was so committed to being a sports photographer.
Yep.
And I got nothing out of that sports stuff. I mean, the stuff is so crappy. But the stuff that I didn't shoot, that's honestly what I really miss. And I think for young people starting out now, the best advice that they can get is to never stop shooting and to shoot all those moments of your own life.
Okay, yeah.
Do the Cartier-Bresson thing. Don't figure you have to go to big events in order to take pictures. Like breathing and walking down the street should be all the event you need.
Right. I actually kind of live by a Mark Twain quote, and I don't have it perfect, but it's something along the lines of 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the things you did do. So get out there and do those things.
Right.
And I think that you pretty much summed that up. In terms of your photography, also you mentioned captured these personal moments. When I'm sent out on an assignment, I more than just shooting XYZ for an editor.
Right.
I've always had this sort of feeling of I'm going here to document what I'm witnessing as a witness to whatever event or whatever moment in time.
I think that's smart. You have to take a little wider view than just what it is you're being offered, and it doesn't cost you anything, really. It doesn't cost the editor anything. It doesn't mean you'll be focused less on whatever your original mission was.
Yeah.
But I think it in fact probably enhances everything. Be willing to look at everything, and don't let anything escape you. It's hard to be that way. I mean, there's a famous story told about Bruno Barbet, a Magnum photographer, French Magnum photographer, running into Cartier-Bresson at one of the Magnum meetings, and they embrace, and Cartier starts feeling like he's patting him down at the airport. He says, "Where's your camera?"
Oh, yeah.
And he couldn't feel the Leica somewhere missing, and he gave him hell for not having a camera with him.
Not being able to capture the moment.
And it's one of those things where I think, especially the ease with which, whether you have like a little point-and-shoot camera, I mean, the quality that you can get from these pocket cameras now is astonishing. So we've lost whatever excuse we might have had about not documenting something, or not even documenting. That makes it sound too serious, but just capturing some little moment in time that's part of your life. I mean, there's no excuse anymore to not have a camera.
And where did you grow up?
Salt Lake City.
You were in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
When did you move to New York City?
Well, I had a summer job. I was in college. I graduated in college in '68, and I had a summer job in '67 with Time Magazine in their picture department.
What were you doing? Yeah.
It was like an internship, except they didn't call it that. It was just like 3 days a week, $85 a week.
Darkroom type stuff?
No, it was hanging out. I mean, it was really funny because they hired me without really knowing what they wanted me to do. And for the first 2 weeks, I showed up. I had this big camera bag that held every piece of equipment I owned, weighed about 800 pounds.
Right.
And I'd kind of carry this thing in wearing a coat and tie every day.
A coat and tie?
I'd have done real good at Geographic. But I ended up, after about the third week, one of the editors who kind of knew I was just sitting there, and this was in '67 when they still had a lot of New York newspapers. I just would read papers every day. I was pretty well informed about what was going on in New York, but I wasn't shooting anything. And at one point, one of the editors said, "David, are you there?" Because it was the little 5-foot wall cubicles,
Right, yeah.
It's like, "David, are you there?" "Why, yes." got to get over to J. Walter Thompson. They've just named a new president, Daniel Seymour. This is 11:30. But he's leaving on vacation at noon.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I ran over to Park Avenue, found this guy, shot one roll of Tri-X, got back to the office. They processed it, and it actually ran as a little one-column cut the next week. And it was a crappy little picture, but it was my first picture in Time magazine. And I think I ended up having 11 pictures published that summer. Mm-hmm. And that kind of got me going. And
there's nothing like seeing your photo in print.
There's nothing, even, just please spell my name right. But exactly. Even if you don't, I'll know it's me.
Right. And your mom will.
And Mom will know. No, it was great. And that, I think, made me think that magazines were what I wanted to do. I had worked for a little weekly paper in Salt Lake City for a couple of summers. Uh-huh. I'd worked for this little weekly neighborhood paper, and they were bought over by these two brothers who it turns out were cousins.
Oh, okay.
And as I always tell the story, much to their embarrassment, is that I think they decided to keep me on because they knew that as family they could pay me 25 cents an hour less than they'd have to pay somebody who wasn't related.
There you go. Yeah.
But it was great experience. I mean, I was working 6 days a week, every kind of shooting, processing the film, making the prints, making screen prints for the litho camera. Uh-huh. It was great experience. That was really the only newspaper work I ever did. I never worked for a daily, never worked for a wire service. And to this day, I'm sadly a pretty bad journalist in terms of getting everybody's name of.
Oh, well.
I know you've just been hit by a car, but can I get your name and your age,
word.
Please?
That's always been the complaint about me is my captions. I'm very brief with my captions, and I hardly take people's names anymore because I'm not really shooting them for newspapers.
No, I know
it's just
what you
documenting
mean.
the things
Right.
around me.
And in 5 years, last night, let's find. Let's go here.
Start playing with your photos.
Last
here.
night, I think it's in here. I picked up the phone. Well, I guess the picture isn't in here, I'm sorry to say. I did a picture in 1971 at a Bob Hope Christmas show in Phu Bai, which was 101st Airborne in Vietnam. Uh-huh. And I have this picture with hundreds of guys jumping up and down and screaming at Joey Heatherton. They're not really screaming at Bob Hope. It's about Joey Heatherton and the other cute blondes who were on this trip. And I have wanted for the longest time to try and find some of the people 43 years later.
Right.
And track them down and meet them and photograph them. And last night, I talked to one of the guys, first time ever I talked to a guy who's in the picture, who, when I finally reached, he said, when it comes around Christmas time, I start thinking of my friends who didn't come back, and I get a little introspective. He didn't use that word, but he starts thinking about those times in Vietnam 40 years ago. And I just typed in Google Bob Hope Phu Bai, and this picture came up, and I clicked on the picture, and it filled my screen, and I realized I'm in that picture.
Oh, wow.
And then he got in touch with my agency, with Contact Press Images, my agency. And then he went to my website and sent me a note. And when I called him last night, he just broke down. He said, I can't believe you're the photographer that took that picture that has all of us in. I mean, it was like this hugely emotional thing. And to me, this is the kind of reminder of what the power of a picture is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really, photography is about memory. And it's all our collective memories, and it's the individual memories that we each bring to and take from photographs. And this one, I'm going to call the guy. I just talked to him for a minute last night. I'm going to call him today, and I'm hoping he's maybe still in touch with a few guys, and we can kind of start to track
Sounds like
down
there might
some
be
of
an
these
interesting
people.
project in that.
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, especially that, I'm 68.
Really?
I look like I'm only 67.
I didn't know you were that old. Goodness.
But, and I'm the Vietnam generation. I was there, not in the Army, but I was there for 2 years as a photographer. And it still marks my generation in a very big way, much as the Gulf and everything, your generation, even if it's in less obvious terms now. But I think it's something that's so important to try and bridge these years in whatever way you can.
So let's talk a little bit about Vietnam. When did you decide that you wanted to go cover something like that? I mean, I I spoke recently with Nick Ut on a podcast, and we talked about, obviously he was in Vietnam.
Right.
It was his world.
Right.
And I've had many friends that have gone to war scenarios, taken pictures, come back. Have had a few that have not come back, and I've never had the guts to kind of do something like that, risk my life to tell that kind of story. And so major kudos to those that do. How did you kind of get those guts to go? Were you worried for yourself? Was it just something that you felt you had to do? And is it different now than then? Obviously it is, but was it safer then?
I mean, right, I have to say, compared to Syria or Iraq now, I mean, Vietnam seems like a walk in the park, and I don't mean that with any disrespect
Right, absolutely.
to what went on in our years of covering the war, but it was there at least were some boundary lines, and they were a little foggy, and like you, I lost probably a dozen friends in Vietnam in the 2 years I was there. I think above all, I really was concentrating on, I wanted to be a Life magazine photographer. And I'd been working for Time as a freelancer in Washington and then in Miami, and I really felt like I wanted to go where the story was. And at one point, John Olson, a good friend of mine who had been a young Army photographer, actually, I'm not even sure he was a photographer in the Army, but he had a camera, sold pictures to Life, got out of the Army, and became the youngest Life staff photographer at age 22. John and I became friends, and he had a story in the summer of 1970. He went back to Vietnam for a month to find a guy that he could come home with and do a story on a vet returning.
Right.
And when he came back, he said, God, there's still a hell of a lot of work for freelancers out there. You should really think about it. And I just, I bought at some point I sort of joke about it, but it was like, I'm going to do my country western song, which is, I bought a one-way ticket to Saigon.
Right.
And I thought really I would probably stay a couple of weeks, and I ended up staying 2 years.
Wow.
And
at that point, you were just completely freelance and did it, or were you represented in some sort of...
I had a deal with Time. I knew the Life editors, but I hadn't really done any work for them. But the thing was, as a freelancer, if you had 2 letters from editors saying that they would promise to consider buying work from you, you could get a press card.
Promise to consider.
Right. No, that was exactly it. You had to have somebody who at least would... And you had
that
to
sounds
be
like spec.
But it was totally spec. Totally spec.
Yeah.
And but you have to invest in yourself at some point.
Yeah.
And I figured I would just give it a try. And I remember I stayed for the first month I was there in the annex of the Continental Palace Hotel, which wasn't the big building. It was the one across the little building across the street, and it was like $4 a night to stay there. And I knew that the Royal Hotel, which is where Philip Jones Griffiths and Horst Foss stayed, was only $3 a night. And every morning I would wake up thinking, you idiot, you just wasted another $1.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I eventually moved to the Royale, which was great because I really got to know Philip Jones Griffiths, who a wonderful, dedicated photographer, and who, I think he did with many people, just kind of unofficially started being a mentor to me just by being in the physical, the fact that we occasionally would see each other at dinner or something. And it's like one of the things I've always tried to understand, that even when people are a little nudgy asking for advice, people were really nice to me on the way up out of obscurity and into trying to be a serious photographer. And I've always tried to return that favor, because it's the one thing you can do that really doesn't cost you anything except a little bit of time. Is just, I remember what Phil, and I have this one great story about Philip. I had been given a guarantee for a 4-day, in those days the day rate was $125. So my air ticket was $512. And John Derniak, who was then the Time editor, said, I'm going to give you a $500 guarantee, which basically pays your ticket to get over there.
Right.
And more importantly, he gave me 200 rolls of film.
Nice.
And he said, I want you to do a story on children of war. I thought about it for a second. I said, well, gee, John, that's great. I sure appreciate it. Now, what exactly do you want? He just like, no. You're the journalist. You tell me what the story is.
That's the time when it's just you become your own, yeah.
And that was an amazing moment. And then I got to Saigon, and now I'm trying to figure out how can I get to this orphanage, and where do I over here. And I'd been spending my first month basically spinning my wheels trying to just figure out what direction things were.
Right.
And I was trying to set up a story to go do this, and finally one day Philip just gave me hell. He said, coming to Vietnam is not about doing like a little story for Time magazine. So what you need to do is to put 50 rolls of film, and this is a quote word for word. You need to put 50 rolls of film in your rucksack, go to Da Nang, and don't come back to Saigon until you've shot every roll.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it was like one of those little light bulb moments. It's like you have to throw yourself into the story. You have to, whatever that story is, you have to just meld into it. Mm-hmm. You can't just be doing these little things. I'm a photographer doing a story. You have to become that story. You have to become part of what it is you're photographing.
So when you were in Vietnam, were you embedded with soldiers, or did you just kind of like...
that's that awful word that no one from the Vietnam generation will happily ever use. It's like we were never embedded, even though, in fact, we would be. But it wasn't, embed has all these horrible connotations to it, rightly so, I think. But basically, if you wanted to go, I have to say, the fact that the press gets a bad rap for, we lost the war in Vietnam because of the press, well, I don't really think so. I think there was some really bad leadership at very high levels that caused whatever that outcome was. All you got to do is read the Nixon tapes.
So speaking,
but no, I just want to finish that. But we would go out with a unit. Were you embedded? Yeah, I was embedded with this group. But honestly, it was not as if they had the same kind of rules that now go for an embed. We'd go out with them. You would get, you were friendly with the people you were with. You were never trying to screw anybody over. I mean, it was just like if there was a helicopter going somewhere, you kind of yell over the helicopter noise. Hey, you going up to Quang Tri? Say, yeah, hop on.
Wow.
It was a very
different time.
Back and forth, and I thought it was very fair. And I look back on it now, and I was in Grenada, which was the first time the Army tried to keep people away from a story.
Oh, wow.
Couldn't believe it, that they were actually being that dumb. And they think they're doing a great job. I don't think they're doing such a great job. But
I've just pulled up a photo, and I know this is not your photo, but there's a bit of a story behind it regarding you. As I was mentioning, did a podcast recently with Nick Ut, a few podcasts back, if anyone wants to check them out on iTunes. But this is Nick's famous Vietnam photo, and you've got a story about this photo.
I have a really long story, actually, and it
you can brief it up. You don't need to tell it all.
Well, we were. This was in June of 1972 in this little village of Trang Bang, about an hour northwest of Saigon, and it was like something that happened, I think, many times in Vietnam. That in the middle of some crappy firefight, the civilians kind of found themselves in the middle, and this is what happened that particular day. The North Vietnamese were attacking the village. The people from the village were hiding in the pagoda. And out on the road outside of town, about 500 or 600 meters, were a bunch of journalists just kind of watching this thing unfold. I think we probably just thought it was too dangerous to try and walk into town, but we're just kind of waiting to see what happened. And, if you hear Nikki tell the story.
I have. You can listen to her.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's... I had, in addition to my Nikon Fs, I had an old Leica Model 3, which was a knob-wind screw-mount Leica that had, anybody knows about Leicas, it didn't have yet the little door on the back that let you load a camera real easy. Just with your thumbs, you'd slide the film in. And the old ones, you had to line up the film in the spool, try and push it into the camera, and you could spend, I wouldn't say days trying to load that camera, but it seemed like days. And as the planes were coming in to dropping this napalm, I was trying to load this camera that was not doing a very good job of wanting to be loaded.
So this is the uncropped version here.
That's the wider shot. Everybody thinks that's me on the right.
It's not you.
No, that's not me.
Oh, that's not you. Okay,
No.
so I was told that was you. Okay.
My legs have never been that skinny. I think this guy was a Vietnamese UPI stringer.
Okay, so I was gonna point it out as
Yeah, no, I
missing
mean,
the shot.
I mean, for a while, everybody thinks it's me, but no, and once we saw this one terrible moment, you could see people running out of the smoke up the road toward us. You knew that something bad had happened, and Nick and another journalist, Alex Shimkin, we were all three standing together on the road, and the two of them just took off running down the road immediately.
Yeah.
It took me, I don't know, another 30 seconds to get my camera loaded. And in those 30 seconds, that's where Nicky made his picture.
Right.
And it was one of those things where, at the time, it just seemed like another crappy thing that had happened to a little village in Vietnam. And, I was shooting that day for the New York Times. We all ended up, he dropped the kids off at a hospital and then went to the AP office in town. And since I was shooting for the Times, I went to the AP to get them to process my film and to transmit a couple of pictures back. And I remember being in the slightly darkened office room of the AP photo section in New York when the techie came out with the first print, this little 5x7 wet print. And it's like, I think my reaction was one of every photographer in the world on every time there's ever been something that was of the same, you're at the same event, which was, I think that's a better frame than what I got.
Yeah.
Do I have a better frame? And I'm looking at this picture, and Horst Voss, who for many years was the photo chief there and who had kind of mentored Nicky when he started taking pictures, big, burly German, and Nicky's this little diminutive Vietnamese, and it kind of, and I'm just standing there in the middle waiting for my film to come out. And he just looks at me and says, "Well, you did good work today, Nickot. Go send it." And then there was some brief discussion about, well, we can't put it on the wire because it's got nudity, and that he just said, "No, you're putting that picture on the wire."
Yeah.
And there was something, but to me, what has always stayed with me is that moment of trying to understand the power. Again, it comes back to the power of a picture, because this was a picture that 5 of us or 6 of us were looking at one moment, and 24 hours later, probably 1 billion people had seen that picture. And within a few days, everybody wanted to know who the girl was. And one of the TV correspondents who, in my pictures, which I don't think I have them on my website, but I have all my stuff. I do have, sorry.
It's okay.
You see one of the TV correspondents, a guy from ITN, pouring water over Kim Phuc, as the little girl Kim Phuc, over her wounds.
Right.
And then the kids being ushered off to a car to be taken to hospital. And a week later, he and another guy from the BBC went back to this hospital to try and find out, because by then everybody is, who is that girl? Who's the girl in the picture?
Yeah.
And in our generation, the girl in the picture really only means one thing. It means this picture and this girl. So they found her in kind of bad shape at this little hospital and got her, they just kind of picked her up and took her across town to a specialized burn unit supported by an American foundation called the Barsky Unit, which handled burn cases. That's really all they did. And that's where she started to be taken care of. And she was there for months before she went home. Anyway, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, the summer of 2012, 40 years to the day after this happened, Kim, now living in Toronto, had a dinner at which all these people who had kind of come in and out of her life showed up. I mean, she went back to Trang Bang, to the little village. She later was taken to Germany. A Stern magazine photographer got her a passport, got her taken to Germany, where she was cared for almost a year and got a lot of reconstructive surgery. She came back to Vietnam, and to hear her tell the story about how, I know I'll never have a husband, I'll never have a boyfriend because I'm so ugly from my burns. But she had a passport, and she ended up going to Cuba to study. It was a when they still had very close relationships between Cuba and North Vietnam, or Vietnam. And there she met a Vietnamese kid, and they fell in love, and they got married, and they went to Moscow on their honeymoon.
Mm-hmm.
And on the way back, the plane had to stop and refuel in Newfoundland, and they decided to defect. And they found a Canadian customs guy who took them under wing and got them eventually resettled. That was 20 years ago. At this dinner 2 years ago were Nick Ut, Chris Wayne, the correspondent who had been pouring the water over her burned little body.
Yeah.
Perry Kretz, who had gotten her to Germany for the reconstructive surgery. A 93-year-old Quebec lady who had been a nurse at the Barsky unit and cared for her for months.
Mm-hmm.
And the customs guy in Canada who had taken them off the plane and given them refuge.
Wow.
Everybody showed up at this dinner for this little girl who no one gave a chance to live. She was not expected to live. Certainly
Right.
at the Vietnamese hospital, they
Certainly,
said,
yeah.
this kid's not going to make it. And now she's this wonderful 50-year-old, beautiful
With a family.
a
life.
and has a foundation that kind of tries to help
And
figure out
her
ways of-
image,
Yeah.
helped change the course of the war, which is
I'm sure
the
it
power
did.
of photography.
But there was something about the power of that picture to save that little girl. Now, if her picture had not been taken, she just would have been another little kid who died as a casualty of the war. But, the picture did it.
So maybe we should move on from
Sorry, I told you it's a
Vietnam.
long story, and it's one that's very hard to shorten
It's a
up.
downer. It's a bit of a downer. I'm sorry about that, everyone.
Actually, I think it's quite the contrary.
Yeah.
I think the story of the power of a picture is quite inspiring and quite positive, but we can fight about that.
So maybe we should talk a little bit about your agency that you built.
Right.
This was built in, was it late 60s or early 70s?
No, Contact Press. I had gone to work after Life folded in 1972. I went to work for the French photo agency Gamma, which was then one of the very few kind of upstart French agencies where everything was pretty much done on spec. I mean, if you think about it, we did occasionally get assignments, but they were few and far between. We'd go out and the agency would split the expenses with the photographer 50-50, and whatever came in, you would split that 50-50. And for me, it was a real education in how to operate as a kind of a lone wolf photographer. And I did that for 2 years, and they had sent over a French editor, a guy named Robert Pledge, who had worked really as a editor at Zoom magazine, this photography magazine, who knew nothing about the press really, but that never stopped Pledge from doing anything. And he and I were the Gamma team in New York, and we did that for 2 years. And at one point, we just thought, why don't we start our own little group here instead of B3000? This is pre-internet, everything that we've come to know. And we started our agency in the fall of 75 and actually incorporated, I think, in early 76. So it's 38 years we've had this little agency.
Well, it's this little agency, but you've worked with some of the biggest names. I mean, have been or are members of the agency. Obviously Photo Brigade's not a photo agency, but it's what it is gathering all the networks and all of the photographers on different levels and bringing together something that's greater than individuals. And I sort of feel that that's kind of what you were doing. You had an amazing network of photographers that you've worked with and in one way or another, that you've had shared experiences, and you thought, okay, let's make our own thing. That's
really what we did. And honestly, for the first it's just to throw it around like a big number, but for the first 25 or 30 years, in a world that was propelled by and sustained by magazines and editorial photography, it was fantastic. I mean, it's no secret, but the last 10 years in the editorial world have been very weird. You have a lot of the terms that we used to operate on, which were just strictly first usage or first rights to some pictures, and then they would revert to the photographer. There's so many publishers have been trying to fight against that. They want to keep it or they want to buy out. And it's been terrible. And I think Well, there have been a lot of really cool things that have come to the forefront because of the internet and because of the ability to expand learning and expand the power of distribution of pictures. That there have also been a number of really unfortunate bits of feedback, one of which is just that, generally speaking, everybody thinks that anything on the network is out there for free, and therefore it kind of, I think in many ways, has kind of devalued what we used to feel was the value of photography and pictures.
Well, you know what's interesting? I was reading up on Contact, and also I think in it you make, or maybe it's on your bio or something, you make some sort of joke about not being a great businessman or something like that. But in effect, you are. I mean, you were thinking about all of these things, that, you know, how things were shifting, and you were always fighting for the photographer. Do you feel that I don't know? Do you feel that things are totally different today? Is it harder for you today to make a buck in the same way that you did back then?
I mean, you know, there used to be magazines that had inspired editors, not always, but there were a fair number of them. They had pages to fill. They had budgets to spend. Mm-hmm. And it was really a great time. Now, everybody's working on the cheap. We found better stuff online, we'll just use that.
Right.
I mean, you're fighting all these, what has been kind of an erosion of the value of, in many ways, I think, of the value of, perceived value of pictures and photography. We still fight. I mean, I work, one of the editors I work with at Contact, Jeffrey Smith, who is the New York manager. I mean, no one will fight for his photographers more than Jeffrey. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of seen as being this, like, odd guy. Why don't you just go along with our crappy terms of service? Well, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, we pass up a lot of stuff just because we don't want to go along with these terrible, these rights grabs that are so prevalent now. I mean, I think back to 1973, the Yom Kippur War between Egypt and Israel. One of the French photographers, the Gamma photographers, had been shooting in Israel. We got his film to Paris and then a set of pictures to New York. And there was a bidding war between Time and Newsweek for one guy's work for about 5 days, and it got up to like $10,000 or $12,000, which in 1973 would have bought you a really nice Chevy.
That's great.
And now, I mean, to try and get $10,000 for anything from anybody.
It's also interesting in terms of agencies. You know, sometimes you feel I've had a sort of a weird. I've always been freelance. I've never been represented by an agency.
Right.
I've always been my own. I've had some of my work here and there represented for random things. Like I mentioned, I was on a Bieber's photographer, so so and so represented that.
Yeah.
But it's hard for, I think, a photographer to decide. Okay, well, I'm going to give 50 or 30% or whatever the cut is to somebody who's going to sell your photo, but sometimes it makes sense, or having an agent represent you in the negotiation process for an assignment. I've had a magazine that wanted to hire me for, you know, $500 for the day and shoot for 2 days, say, and that was it, you know, and that would give them usage. And I said, well, no, that's not how it used to be. I mean, I've worked with you guys in the past. It's, you know, $500 against space rate, and then if you're going to run a 5-page spread, you know, we're talking a lot more money. And I had this editor say to me, you know, no, you're full of it. You know, maybe we should talk to your agent. And I said, well, okay, I'll bring in my agent for this one.
And just spin around.
And the same thing, the same job that was going to pay $1,000 paid $3,500. You know, just because you had an agent. Now the agent took a chunk of that, but in the end, I was still able to make significantly more money than I would have if I had just done it.
Our whole way of working was based on being able to resell the material in other markets. And, you know, you didn't always double or triple what you made, or sometimes you would go far beyond that. But it is a constant fight. And one of the things that's been, I think, really unfortunate is that a couple of really big mega agencies have just been fighting their way to the bottom. You know, I mean, you can buy a picture for $1.65 at one of these big mega agents. They will go unnamed, but they know who they are. And it's sorry. The problem is really that it becomes a a way of trying to label the value of photography as something that has so much less value, perceived value, than it really should have. So I think for me, that's really we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And I know, if you work for one of those really big agencies, maybe you make a great living and you get benefits and everything. For a long time I did have benefits, but it wasn't as if I ever had anything guaranteed.
Right.
Whatever I did, we'd try and sell it. We'd try and sell it in France and Italy and Germany and maybe Spain. And in those, there was a time in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s when all of these markets were quite vibrant. And, when you think about it, the royal wedding in 1980, now it's 81 or 82, Diana and Prince Charles, we flew to London, 6 or 7 photographers. Pope trips with Pope John Paul II. When the Pope went to England in the summer, I think the wedding was in 81. In the summer of 82, it was the summer of the Falklands War between England and Argentina, and the Pope decided to go to the UK, after which he then realized he had to go also to Argentina just to be fair. On the Pope trip to England, we had 5 photographers. I mean, you can't imagine anything like that happening now. And the thing that I think is the saddest part of it all is that the editors had a budget and they had great pages to fill, and they were happy to see good pictures and do something with them. And to me, the fact that so much of it has gone online now, that's, I think, what I feel the saddest about is that it's not that it won't be seen. Maybe it'll be seen by more people online. That's possible. But we are assaulted with so many millions of images every day that having the time to just take a breath and breathe easy and look at the pictures. I mean, there's almost no time for that kind of reflection anymore.
That's true. I mean, when you started shooting sports, I started shooting sports. I used to shoot all the Yankees games for the New York Times. I interned at the New York Times. And, we were on deadline. We had to, I wasn't there to shoot to get the most amazing photo. It was going to be whatever that game-changing picture is, and you need it for the internet right now.
Right.
So, you're really just after trying to get it from one place to another, edited to the network or to the newspaper, and maybe I missed out on really killing something much better, which would have been far more beautiful. And I wonder if photos are not as great.
I've been covering the summer.
Process.
I've been covering the Summer Olympics since 1984. So that's, don't do the math, 30 years. I've been to 10 Olympic Games. Fortunately, every time I'm at the Olympics, I managed to wriggle out of, in most cases, there's always a few things you have to do, but I kind of wriggle out of all the have-to-do stuff, and I just try and spend my time on the get-to-do stuff. And, I'm not sure I always come up with something that's going to be amazing or beautiful or special or anything, but I so love having the opportunity to try, whether it's schlepping a 4x5 camera or just something that's maybe more work for me, may very well be just more work for me, but if it's a chance to make a picture that I wouldn't otherwise get to make, I'm game. And I love the fact that I still have the opportunity now and then to do that. And
so that's another thing is we've talked about you and film. I have a note here that you call yourself a film photographer in a digital age. Was that the film photographer?
Oh, I think for the Luminance conference
I made some notes. But I'm going to pull up let's see here. You have a big camera one, don't you?
Yeah, there is a big one more.
One more big camera. So you shoot a lot with large format cameras, and the difference in shooting for that is what every you take a picture, it's like 2 pictures per minute or something like that if you're going really fast, right?
Right. I mean, you're really going for that first frame, but it's like when you hear a Navy artillery, the Navy gunnery guys talk about how long it takes to get that second round off. Like, you can go around, the gun can already be loaded, and you fire the first one. Reloading and getting that second round, that's the key time that you're dealing with. Because what will always happen is somebody will always blink in that first picture that you didn't want them to blink.
This is just a stunning photo. This one.
Oh, thank you.
Right
and this
there.
one, this one has actually been. I goofed around with it in Snapseed a little bit, but I mean, it starts out as a large format picture. This was a soldier, a paralyzed soldier from Iraq, a little kid playing cricket in Bangladesh.
And so have you found? And I can imagine walking around. I've become a Leica shooter over the last few years, and I've noticed that when I shoot a portrait or something, they notice a different camera. Mm-hmm. And obviously, when you're lugging around a huge tripod with this huge speed graphic or whatever you're using, and you want to take a beautiful portrait of somebody, they'll give you maybe a little more time, or it'll break the ice to talk about what you're doing, and you might capture something a little bit different than you would if you were just with a normal digital SLR or whatever.
I think it just forces you to try and see what you're looking at a little bit differently, and try and it's never, people say, well, when do you want to do black and white, when do you do color, when do you use large format, when do you just use with your digital cameras. I don't think it's the kind of thing you can ever really see until you're looking at it, mm-hmm. And then you just feel it, and there's no way to describe it. I don't know. I mean, I wish it were more easily determined, but it's something that you just have to feel when you see it.
Well, and you're definitely usually not on deadline when you're shooting these. I read or saw a story about how you missed a deadline for time or something like that, but ended up winning a World Press with the photo. Can you tell a little bit about that?
Well, that was a trip to Korea, and I was going on my way to Burma mm-hmm. in November of 79, and when I got to Thailand, waiting to go get my Burmese visa and everything, I had an extra day, and it was just at the time when the Cambodian refugees were coming out of Cambodia into Thailand. Uh-huh. And I managed to go with a couple of friends. We got a car. We drove up to the refugee area. I think I probably spent an hour there, and we got back in the car and came back. And I was still shooting Kodachrome in those days, which always took an extra day to process, because I had to go out to Fairlawn, New Jersey, to the Kodak lab, and back on the little truck.
Man,
and there were any number of times. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'd shoot something, and my colleagues would be shooting Ektachrome, which was a 1-hour process, and we'd come in on, say, Tuesday or Wednesday, and they'd get the layouts would get filled with one of their pictures, and then Friday afternoon, my Kodachrome would come back from the lab, mm-hmm. and they'd say, "Wow, look at the color," and they'd swap out my picture for their picture, thereby earning the enmity of one of my close friends. Any number of times that happened. Mm-hmm. But there was something about the Kodachrome, the quality of that film, and the look of it that was just really beautiful.
Well, there's something about just changing the aesthetic of something, whether it's through Kodachrome, whether mm-hmm. it's through large format, whether it's through Holga, whether it's through Leica glass versus
right. No, that's true. There are all these little things. It isn't all just the same picture being taken by the same camera and the same sensibility. And these pictures, this is from the first color pictures I ever had published of Americans coming to see the launch of Apollo 11, the first men to land on the moon, July of 1969 in Titusville,
I bet that was an amazing
Florida.
Experience.
It was great. And I was with my friend Jean-Pierre Lafont, who just published his book of 35 years of pictures called Photographer's Paradise. Mm-hmm. I think America in Turmoil, 1966 to 1999, something like that. And I'd met Jean-Pierre at the Nixon swearing in a couple of months before, and we ended up down here in I'll leave that one up for 1 second. There's a that's not it. Let's see. Let me just find it. The picture here. It's kind of a fun story. This one. Okay, that looks just like a picture of a bunch of people looking at a rocket, right? Jean-Pierre and I had decided to go out in the water and shoot back at the people up on the shore as they were looking at the rocket. I mean, now that I look at it, it probably looks like hey, can you guys pretend that the rocket's still going up? Because right. The people in the back couldn't give a crap about what's going on. But anyway, there are definitely pictures of when it was really happening.
Sure.
And we're in the water. He was, the thoughtful French photographer. He brought a 2-step ladder, so he's up a little higher. and I'm just sort of there with my jeans rolled up. At the occasion of the 40th anniversary of Apollo 11 in '09, my office said, "Where are your pictures?" And I went back into my basement archive and I found this envelope that just said Apollo 11, Time Magazine, 1969. And I stayed up all night. I couldn't believe it. I found all these pictures, stayed up until 5 in the morning scanning about 60 pictures. And I sent them to New York. We got a 6 or 8 page piece published in Smithsonian Magazine. And immediately, as soon as it was published, I got an email from this guy saying, "I'm the guy in the green shirt whose hand is up to his glasses." Said, "I had just finished medical school, and my wife and I were driving across country to start my residency." Like, this is the beginning of this guy's career.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we stopped to watch the launch, and I just found this picture in Smithsonian. My sister called me this morning and said, "Oh, you got to go on the Smithsonian website. There you are, there you are." And he said, I'd love to get a copy of this picture." And so I thought, well, how do you not do that? So I sent him a copy of a file, and in the note I sent to him, I thought about it for a second. I said, if you're in my picture, maybe I'm in your picture.
Hey,
Did you guys shoot anything that day? And they found their little Instamatic negative, and they sent it to me, and I scanned it like super high resolution, and there's a big helicopter just flying over at that moment, and Jean-Pierre and I each, at that moment, we're turned around looking at the rocket, which you can't really even see in their picture, but it's like, there we are.
Yeah. And
it was like, yeah, I was there for Apollo 11, and I got proof. But it was so fantastic because, everybody uses the term Instamatic. She really did have
the actual Instamatic.
A little Instamatic camera. And you can see the guy here on the left. He's got his Sony
tape player,
a cassette player, and he's got a microphone in his hand or a transistor radio in his hand, and he's recording the sound of it. This was like the ultimate and bad analog technology.
Yeah.
But it still had that people connection, which to me is what was so fantastic.
There's something about finding an old photo that you never knew existed and realizing that moment in time has been captured by somebody who you never knew took the photo. And how many of those we as professional photographers have? How many moments that probably mean something to somebody that no one ever knows and no one ever will know for one reason or another.
No, because there's so many pictures that you can't give them all your attention. But like this was the one moment I turned around to photograph the rocket. I'm thinking, I'm not going to come all the way down here and be at this launch and not at least get one picture. I think I made 2 frames. Turn around, there's Apollo 11 going up, and I went back to photographing.
Well, it's hard to believe that in my lifetime we haven't left lower Earth orbit. And so these types of, recently there was did you go down for the last rocket? I did not,
no. And it was like the first time since the last shuttle launch that all of the regulars showed up. There are 7 or 8 photographers, wire service people, and a couple of people who just love space stuff, and they were all there for the launch of that test vehicle a couple of weeks ago.
Right. Well, let me change pace just a little bit because we are about an hour in at this point, and I want to open it up. If anyone has questions here in a little bit, we will open it up to questions. But one of the more interesting, you have so many interesting stories. This Bob Marley. So, when was this taken? When was this picture story
March
taken?
March of 1976.
And you were in New York City at the time?
No.
Well,
I'm living in New York, but I got one of those phone calls, and this is what I always describe to people who don't know what that means as the magic phone call. You know.
Yeah.
And this is like if you didn't happen to be home when the phone rang, you were screwed. You just missed out. But there was no phone forwarding. There were no cell phones. There was no email.
Right.
None of this stuff. And basically, the phone rang. It was Arnold Drapkin from Time Magazine, and he said, "Look, we're doing a story on this new musical thing called reggae," and nobody really knew what that was. But we want you to go to Jamaica with Dave DeVos, who was a reporter that I'd worked with in Vietnam, and was a good friend of mine. Said, "We'd like you to go." And there's this new thing, and just kind of, I don't even think I knew who Bob Marley was when I got on that plane. But reggae was just kind of breaking out from Jamaica, and we went to Ocho Rios, and we spent 4 or 5 days meeting a bunch of other acts, and kind of everywhere we go, people would, at the end of the conversation, would say, well, when are you going to see Bob? Because there, Bob Marley was already
Big deal.
something.
Yeah.
And so we finally spent an afternoon with him.
So this was basically an afternoon, then you shot the concert.
An afternoon, and then a year later, I happened to be in Paris, and this was the great thing about having an agency, which was somebody from Rolling Stone was looking to get somebody in Europe to cover what was going to be called the Exodus Tour, and they called Contact, and they said, "Oh, Burnett's in Paris; he could do it." Mm-hmm. And they put me together with the band, and I spent, I think, 4 or 5 days with them, just riding the bus with them on the Exodus Tour. And, stupid me, I should have just invited myself to stay for another week. They didn't care. This picture here, which is, it was you know what a slit camera is? It's like, it doesn't have a shutter. It just has a slit where one molecule wide of light can pass through the lens and onto either the film or a sensor or whatever
your medium
is.
Yeah.
In my case, it was Tri-X being hand cranked through a little. It was an old Canon 35 millimeter camera that the shutter had broken, and I just tore the shutter bits out, put a slit in. I'd put a roll of film in, wind it all the way through, and then I would rewind it as something happened in front of the lens. So I'd focus out about 10 feet. And in this case, I had Bob run with a guitar. And basically, he just had to run through a plane.
Oh, so he ran through the plane.
Yeah, there's a plane out there about 3 meters from where I am. And when it's like a racetrack finish line camera.
Right.
It only
That's
photographs that plane.
Yeah.
So when you go through it, the moving image and the moving film, you're trying to basically lay the image down on the film. So you'd end up with a strip of film that would be like 12 inches long. And I had him do this about 10 or 12 times. Did
he have any idea what was going to... He
had no idea.
Because you couldn't show him afterwards.
You couldn't. You couldn't. And I barely knew what I was doing. Right. I had actually used this on an aircraft carrier to photograph planes grabbing the arresting hook.
Oh, interesting.
I'd done that, and that was kind of cool. But this was way more cool. But I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
Still don't. And you're like, okay, Bob, go, run. And then as soon as he was through the plane, I just, okay, cool. Now, can you try it again? This time, hold the guitar in your left hand. Okay, run, go. Okay, thanks. That's good. So he did this like 10 or 12 times, and I knew that he was like starting to look at his peeps that were all gathered there, like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
What is this? This is weird, because no one had ever had him do this before. It was pretty clear. The next year, when I was in Paris, we sold this set of pictures to a French rock and roll magazine, and they used this picture as a double page. Mm-hmm. So the first time I saw him again, I opened this one up, and I said, Bob, do you remember last year when I had you running back and forth in front of the garage? And like I didn't even have to finish the sentence, and he just started to smile and kind of lit up, and at that moment I was in.
Yeah.
Then he knew, A, I had film in the camera.
Right.
And B, you
knew what you were doing.
I was a force to be reckoned with. I wasn't just another BSer who was there trying to hang on. I was going to come up with some pictures, so I could do anything I wanted, and it was great.
And it looks like you had a decent time with him.
He was fantastic. I mean, he just didn't.
Little contact.
It was like there was no publicist. It's like. When he hands you a spliff, what do? You say thanks.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, exactly. So, real quickly, I'll mention a couple other things. For instance, 44 Days, the Iranian Revolution, which is some really powerful work in here. And I, to be honest with you, this is before my time, so I don't really know so much about this history, and was showing this work to one of my friends, and we discussed it. And it's, I don't know, maybe you can give a brief rundown of your time there.
Well, I had been doing a story, another one of these great magic phone calls.
Oh, this was that photo I was talking about.
Yeah.
With the... Looks like there's like reticulate.
Oh, that one is just stained. It's stained E6.
Stained E6, okay.
And it could be, somebody we'll send it to one of those people that's always sending you emails about cleaning up your film.
Right. In India.
In Bangalore or something,
sure.
And they'll clean it up and it'll look great. But it was one of those stories that I I had been in Pakistan, the westernmost province of Pakistan called Baluchistan, and I was trying to figure out what to do. It was just about Christmas, 1978, and like, what do I do next? And as a freelancer, the one thing you really never wanted to do was to waste a good airline ticket.
Right.
Like, I flew halfway around the world, and what am I going to do? Go home? I don't think so. So I'd been listening. In those days, we all had these little, this side that obviously was never quite this small, but you had your little Sony shortwave radio, and that was how you stayed in touch with the world.
Really?
BBC, maybe VOA, but mainly BBC. And that was what told you what else was happening in the world. There was no cable TV. The little hotel I was in Pakistan had nothing attached to the outside world, at least beyond an Urdu, which I didn't speak, so it was very hard to know what was going on. Mm-hmm. But I had heard stories building about how there had been a number of protests against the Shah, and I thought, well, why don't I go to Iran for a couple of days and check it out? So Christmas Day, I flew to Tehran. Within an hour of arriving, I was in my first gun battle.
Oh my God!
And it was like, wow, this is a happening place.
Was this this was after Vietnam?
This was basically January 1979, February 1979.
Did you feel more worried for yourself, say, in this situation or in Vietnam?
Well, I mean, I didn't. When I've never really been a great guy when the shooting starts. I mean, I'll look for cover, but it's the story is really, it's like just trying to follow the story is what in the end really becomes the key. How do you tell a story in a visual way that is kind of understandable to people who aren't there? And the more I got into what was going on in Iran, the more I really figured I should stay and cover it. And I stayed for a month and a half.
It seems like you had amazing access as well.
Well, this was a picture that was an exclusive that basically nobody else got in there. I had kind of worked on the press operations guy after Khomeini returned to Tehran. I was trying to talk my way in, and mostly this guy, he had been an economics professor and had been asked to take care of the press, and he didn't really have any briefing, he had no information for anybody. So most of the press stopped coming to his briefing, but I would go every day, and I kept bugging him about trying to get in to make that picture, and finally I think I just wore him down, and after a few days, I was in. And it's like, there's a picture under the old classics of the funeral of Juan Perón, and it was the same kind of thing, just like
this.
No, let's see. I'm going to
keep going
down to that one.
This picture, yeah.
Yeah, this is Juan Perón lying in state in Buenos Aires, which I managed. Their Capitol building had a big dome, much as our Capitol building in Washington does. And I just talked my way into getting upstairs for 10 seconds to peek over the edge of the railing and shoot literally about 5 frames, and then
that lighting is so creepy too. Was that just the lighting that was on it?
That's just how it was lit. I mean, it was like there was no, actually part of the conversation with this big bulldog of a sergeant was about flash. It was like, no tengo flash, nada de flash. Muy silencio, and I just fire the camera, click, no motor drives, nothing. Yeah. Just try and keep it quiet.
Yeah.
Just kind of keep it quiet. And I made 6 frames, and this giant claw grabs me and just pulled me back.
You're done.
But I had it.
Yeah.
Had the picture. You don't need 10 rolls. You need a couple of frames.
Is it hard for you? I mean, you've gone to so many places like Iran and Vietnam and these Afghanistan and everywhere else and it's so culturally different than how you were brought up in Salt Lake City and New York.
Yeah, Kandahar and Salt Lake. Weigh and measure.
Right. I mean, was that difficult for you to kind of?
No, I mean, I've always been good at trying to pretend I spoke 10 words of every language. And
is it one of those things for me? I always think like a great beaming eyes and a smile always helps. You know what I mean?
I mean, I'm always open in a friendly way. I don't ever want to be seen as invasive to a point of putting people off. I like to be welcoming. I arrived in Quetta, which pretty much is probably a place you couldn't even wander around now as an American with a camera. It's gotten very radicalized. But I arrived on Ashura, which was the day that all the men would walk in the street bare-chested, banging themselves with chains and bloody and everything. They were just like, okay, Kodachrome, let's see, 250 at 2.8, and I'm backpedaling through Quetta for like an hour and a half. Everybody was cool.
Yeah.
Nowadays, the world has changed in a lot of ways that have not, I would say, will not particularly foster, warm fuzziness, which is really too bad. I mean, I just feel that the radicalization that's happened in so many places, and it's both the Taliban and it's the Americans here who think like the Taliban. I mean,
That's a stunning photo.
That's my friend Bob Williams at the 50th anniversary of D-Day. Huh. And he had, this is another one of those long, hilarious stories that needs a cognac or two, but suffice to say that the only people who got a picture that day were the Turnley brothers and me.
Yeah.
And it was by total accident. And we thought we weren't going to get anything. You see where that tree line is in the distance?
Yeah.
We accidentally were out where that tree line is. And it's a long, great story. But just what happened was they finally said, okay, you got to go back to where the press is. So we're kind of going back across the LZ after the old guys. These are the vets who have decided to jump 50 years later, and including one guy who I will clean the story up a little bit, but he lands in this cow field. They almost as if they were paying homage to what happened in 1944. They dropped him in the wrong place. And instead of landing in the LZ, they all landed in this muddy cow field.
Oh, right, yeah.
And this one guy,
wasn't sure it wasn't just muddy.
A 73-year-old, still a paratrooper, and he lands in like up to his knees. It's like, Jesus, I wait 50 years to jump in this godforsaken place, and I land in a pile of cowpucky. But it was these guys. I mean, you can see his feet are all covered with mud. But it was like that moment as these guys were walking off the LZ that a bunch of current troops were flown over and just kind of filled the sky with parachutes. And as soon as we all got over, like back another 100 yards in back of me, they threw us all back in the press pen, where, of course, you could see nothing. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what we do with the press. We put them in a place where they can't see anything.
Right. And
that's when one of the guys, Tom Haley, is like, how'd you guys get out there? I said, man, you're never going to believe it. This was like the biggest accident ever. Accident? Burnett and the Turnleys are the only people to make a picture? That's no accident. So it's like when somebody gets it wrong, you don't want to correct them. Let the legend build.
Yeah. Well, I want to open this up to questions here in a minute, but there's just so many things you've done. You've photographed the fall of the Berlin Wall, famine in Ethiopia, like you said, all the Olympics, presidential elections. This guy's done just about everything. And
my favorite line is Amy Schiffman, who used to work at American Photographer magazine before it became American Photo. But Amy once wrote a piece about me and said, he's been everywhere, but only for an hour.
Only for an hour, yeah. It seems like you'd have to be to go to all these places. And then lastly, before we open it up, I just want to, you were talking to me just before we started about putting together a book. And writing a book.
One of the things I've kind of enjoyed, even though it drives my agent friends at the office crazy, is putting pictures and writing little background stories about them on Facebook. And I have to say that one of the things that I've taken from it is that I think that there is probably a good deal of interest. If I can figure out a way to write it, I don't mind the writing. The writing is actually kind of fun, and it forces me to try and re-examine and think about what was going on at the time that I was doing the work. And I still have a lot of my little spiral-bound workbooks with notes taken from 1977 and stuff like that. And all these things that kind of help reconstruct in your own mind the memories of what it was all about, because
that'd be a great book.
So much of this stuff is just gone if you let it be gone.
Right.
And I don't want it to be gone. I'd like to hang on to it. And I'll say another thing that I find really interesting, whether it's at Luminance or some other place where you're in a big dark room with giant pictures projected, and you have to get out there essentially without any notes and just talk about the pictures. There's something, I don't know what the word is, physiologically, I suppose, that happens when you're under a lot of pressure not to screw up.
Right.
And it's a dark room, so you can't really see anything other than it's this big, creepy space. And the pictures are really big, and the pictures flash up, and they go black, and then the picture comes back up. There's something that happens, at least with me, that triggers memories that if I sat down for a week to try and remember something, I couldn't do it. But if I'm in a room that the pictures are flashing and I'm ramped up and maybe I've had a coffee or two,
right,
these memories come back and these little details come back. And I think that's, I've tried to figure out a way to remember these things that's equal to what you get from when you have that kind of experience, and I find it's hard to do. But I like the idea of writing about it, and I'm going to try and put a book together with some of these pictures.
That sounds great.
And the stories behind them.
Well, we'll have to do a little review on it and promote it through Photo Brigade once it does come out. Maybe get you a gift card to Starbucks to get that caffeine buzz going.
Yeah, I'm a decaf guy, but still, it's all about the flavor. It's not about the caffeine.
Right. Well, all right. Well, I want to open it up quickly before, if anybody in the audience here has any questions, feel free to ask. Go ahead. I'll repeat.
Yes, I am Pastor Saunders. Very interesting curriculum and vitae, or whatever they call it. Your resume is something that impressed me. The question is, when you take these pictures in film and you are in these deadlines, who handles in the lab? Do they crop it for you, or you don't have to be there?
It's out of your hands.
So let's repeat the question.
Yeah.
The question
okay,
is,
sure. Sorry.
The question was, when you're out in the field shooting film, who on deadline, who deals with cropping and toning and all that kind of stuff?
And depending on who you're working for, it isn't always even a question of being on deadline. I mean, as my friend Ira here, who's done many more jobs for the Geographic than I have, there are people whose job it is, say at the National Geographic, just to review the pictures that the photographers come in. It becomes very much a team effort. And sometimes, if you're on deadline, there's not much time and you have to make a very quick decision. And there are other times when you have all the time in the world, but you still have to eventually decide on what it is you're going to do. I have to say that I think I've actually been saved by editors finding pictures that I didn't know I had, more times than I've been angry at them for missing something. Although I have a couple of both, a couple of famous pictures that I couldn't get anybody, like the Monica Lewinsky picture sipping a martini. I couldn't get anybody in my office or at Time Magazine even to print that picture.
Really?
And I kept saying, I think that's really the best picture. Really, I personally think that's the picture. And then finally, we made a print just because I was yelling at my office. And we took it to Life Magazine, and they hey, man, double page.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get vindicated. It doesn't mean you're always right. But, the photographer, I think, has 1% more moral thrust in this thing than anybody else. So even if you just have 1% more, people should listen to you, that 1%.
Yes?
I don't know if you have it up on your website, but can you tell us about the Usain Bolt picture?
Usain Bolt?
Which one? The
100 meters in 2008.
Oh. Yeah, actually, it's 2012, I think. Hang on, let's go here. London 2012. Okay. Oh, I just happen to have that here.
So he asked about the Usain Bolt.
I'm trying to find
photo,
the...
which you probably shot on Speed Graphic, yeah?
I did, actually, and I don't even know.
What was it like using it in general during the Olympics?
Big, heavy, stupid, but doesn't mean it isn't fun to use. I know it's in there somewhere, I think.
I'll go through and maybe I'll find it.
Anyway, a lot of these are digital picture. These are pretty much all digital. If we get to a couple of the 4x5s, you have to just try and figure out what's going to work. And I know there's a really great picture, which I don't think I even have on the website, that one of the other guys who was across the track shot of all the photographers.
Yeah.
and everybody's got their Canons and their Nikons, and then I've got my Speed Graphic. And that's kind of, that's how I want to be remembered. I mean, just trying to make a picture that was a little different and a little bit different way of looking at something that we maybe all looked at before. That's a 4.5 right there.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, I mean, could you have done it better or the same picture with a digital camera? Probably. Same with that 4.5.
I thought that was really funny seeing that. I think there was you were a meme or something on the internet during the Olympics. Like, who is this guy or the most awesome guy?
Oh no, there was a thing on Gawker. No, not Photo Geek, but one of those sort of the Geek Squad, not Geek Squad, but it was one of those things. I was in the background of a video that included my camera on a tripod. And,
right.
Yeah, so, it's, the thing is, yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Well, thank you for noticing. I appreciate it. No, it's just, it's like I don't know that my picture's any better than anybody else's that's actually sharp or in focus, which I'm not even sure mine was. But like that picture, I'll take that picture because to me, I come back to like wanting to try and come up with something that is that's the shot. Okay.
Oh, okay.
There it is. So that's panning at 125 at about 3.5 with Tri-X or probably HP5. And over there on the far side was Nick Diedlich was shooting a picture of all the photographers. And, it's one of those things. I think the best picture that was made of the 100 meters was by Adam Pretty, the Australian photographer, who had a 400 or a 600 at the start, aiming down the track at the finish line. And he's got everybody at the right just before the finish line, a long ways away, and their feet are all off the ground, and they're all
like horses
suspended.
Or something. Yeah,
it's a great picture, and that's the thing about the Olympics. The Olympics is the photographer's Olympics. I mean, forget the 100 meters. It's more like the 100 megabytes. I mean, it's like you really are in the company of the best photographers in the world. Don't screw up.
Yeah. That's one of the other things I meant to just with time, but is shooting the Olympics, separating yourself like you did with these different mediums, but then also you're always put right next to all of these other photographers, right. So you have to somehow one-up them in a different way. And you, I think, obviously you have plenty of skill to do it with a regular camera, but to take the chance, because this is hit or miss. I mean,
it's mostly miss.
But I mean, that's the point, is that you probably came back with a dozen killer Olympic shots with that camera.
I probably have a dozen pictures that I really like, and for me, what I love about this picture is that I love the sports pictures of the 20s and the 30s.
Yeah. Because
they were shot with the equivalent of a little brownie. Maybe it was like a little bit more of a camera.
But you're right up in it.
But basically, it gives you a scene of what was going on then. It isn't just this amazing close-up, which we can do now with the 600. You go for that close-up, or you go for something that takes you into the picture. I like coming out of the picture and trying to show you this is what it was like if you were. That's one of my favorites there.
That's cool.
Just like it's a non-moment, but
well, I mean, you get to see the judges, you get to see the spectators.
This is what it's like if you were at the Olympics.
Right.
That's really what I'm trying to show you, is give you a feel of what it was like if you had a ticket and you were at the Olympics. Now you can say, well, maybe that's not very interesting, and you can have that discussion for a long time. But to me, it is part of the whole thing. Is really. This was in the, that's where the divers practice before they go into the diving boards.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. First, I want to congratulate you on your body of work. It's beautiful.
Thank you very much.
The question I have is about when you worked for different publications, did they own your images?
No. I mean, it depends. More and more, they would like to have you sign a deal that gives them the pictures. But for all the kind of the grown-up time that I've been working, everybody hires you for first reproduction rights, after which the rights come back to you. And I have to say that, there are a few rolls of film of mine, like a bunch of pictures of singers from the summer of 1977 in Paris. I can't find that stuff. But I pretty much have almost everything I've ever shot and I own the rights to it. And I've been lucky enough. I have so many friends who, if they worked for a wire service, well, we're going to keep that one. So we'll keep one negative on this side and one on that side, click, click, and they throw the rest away. I mean, back in the 70s, that's what they did. If you could take what ended up in the AP and UPI wastebasket of the 1960s and 70s, you'd win every prize in the book, because there's no question that great pictures were just thrown away. They were looking for that immediate, talk about immediate deadline. That's what they were going for as a wire service. But no, I mean, I have always wanted to own my pictures, and whatever the deal is that lets the client use them, I always want them to be used. Please use them as much as you can. But in the end, they come back to me.
And that's a business thing, That's one of those things that, and you have to make those decisions. I've had to and am dealing with clients that want to limit your usage of how you use photos and into the future. But as a freelance photographer, you own the photo and you want to be able to make a legitimate licensing fee in the future. You know what I mean? And frankly, maybe 99% of the photos that we take may not be worth
Probably
anything
have no
in the
use,
future.
yeah.
But if that one person goes on to be that one person that does something, it's a magazine cover or it's an iconic photo like these Bob Marley photos.
I mean, I didn't really know that Bob Marley was going to turn out to be Bob Marley at the time, and probably he didn't either, for that matter.
Well, he probably knew he was Bob Marley at that time.
Well, he knew he was Bob Marley, but he didn't know he was Bob Marley.
But it's just a business decision, and sometimes the best business decision, if you have a client that is unwilling to waver in that, is to pass respectfully,
And part of the problem, I think, is that there are so many people that are starting out who are either feeling like they've got to just do whatever it takes to get discovered, or they have to give in to all these onerous terms, otherwise they won't get any work at all. And it's a very unhealthy environment for all of us, I think, because it just engenders people. We're raising a new generation of editors that thinks that it's normal that they own everything. That's a bad deal too.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just to follow up on that, the thing is, my dilemma is that in the early days, I did freelance, and the thing is, they're in the vaults now, and as you know, the archives for these major publications, INS, whatever, is very valuable now. So it's hard to pull from that vault now. You can't get a hold of those people.
Interesting, yeah. Well, that's a different time. Like nowadays, you shoot digitally, and you can always have a copy of those. Right. Back then, yeah, I mean that's a hard thing.
No, and I did
because you send those rolls away. You're in Vietnam, you send them out, they're gone.
I did a job for U.S. News and World Report when I had been in Vietnam for about a month and a half, and they weren't great pictures. It was like one day out with a unit and the 1st Air Cav, but the colonel turned out to be a guy who was kind of a big deal, and yet they didn't send me the stuff back. They were like, well, we paid for it. And I'm in Vietnam, and they're in Washington. And what ended up happening is 10 years ago when U.S. News went out of business, they donated all of their archives to the Library of Congress. Now, I was at the Library of Congress a couple of years ago, and I actually found my contact sheets in the files, but I couldn't just steal them out.
Right.
I mean,
and now they're also then public domain if they're in the Library of Congress.
That bothers me less than I would love to be able to get the negatives back. Because
that's true, yeah.
Most of the stuff that's in public domain, for example, like that, I mean, fine. Nothing's really ever going to happen to it. But just increasing your own possibility of controlling your own pictures, that's kind of really what it comes down to for me.
And,
But you're right. It's tough. I mean, stuff goes away or it goes into the giant Corbis vault in Pennsylvania or wherever it is. And, it's... I grew up in Utah. I did a story on the Mormon Church 30 years ago, and I visited their gigantic cavern out in, it looks like that scene in Indiana Jones where there's at the end of the movie, it's that giant repository where they kind of roll the little wagon in there. Somewhere your roll of Tri-X is in there somewhere. Go find it.
Right. Anybody else? Bueller?
I just got a digital question.
One digital.
What's your feelings on? Do you worry about your pictures being repurposed or big like Richard Prince stuff, and the Bob Marley Rastafari stuff.
Yeah.
Rastafari, Richard Prince. I mean, how do we control these images now in the digital age, especially the archival, historic, iconic stuff?
The question was about digital.
Sorry. Yeah.
Was about digital and how you. I'm sorry.
Like the repurposing, and how do
you control it? How do you keep control over your own images?
Around your own images.
Yeah. Well, as my friend Arthur Grace used to say, once it's out there, it's out there. And, somebody like Richard Prince, I mean, let's be honest, the worst. Some of the stuff that he's done originally is kind of interesting, but when all you're doing is photographing somebody else's work and making a big print out of it, I think that's not exactly the most artistic thing. What really bugs me about a lot of this stuff is that the big museums get behind it and add a kind of a fresh imprimatur to it, like, oh, it's so artsy. But you can't control it. I mean, the zeros and the ones are kind of out there. And there's no way to put the genie back in the bottle. I mean, I have a few friends that have refused to ever put anything online. I think that's probably a little bit radical of a
Well, there's
position.
a certain approach you have to take about getting the photos seen and not getting them out there enough that they're completely useless, so that no one will buy them because they're so out there.
But you have to know that you're going to get nipped at by the public. And it's just.
One of the things I would say to that, I mean, I know the question was directed towards him, but is Photo Shelter. I use Photo Shelter to back up all of my photos immediately, and those are kind of behind they have a security feature where you can't drag and drop. You can have watermark features, and you can send those galleries out, slideshows anywhere. And so if somebody steals it, it's going to have your watermark. And if they end up removing your watermark, they're actively removing your watermark. That shows willfulness, and then you can build a case against those people. But I agree with you. Once they're out, it's kind of hard to control. But there are ways to sort of see where they're being used, and you have to be vigilant about, if you want to control it, vigilant about emailing these people and contacting the people and telling them to take it down or invoicing them.
But every day we all get like 5 links from five different sources that have some little click thing on us, like 12 of the most awesomely timed photographs ever. And you look at these pictures, and they're probably pretty interesting pictures, but let's face it, the photographer is getting nothing for that, and probably never will.
But the post probably got thousands and thousands of dollars.
I don't know. I don't know what kind of money they end up getting for these things.
Oh, you'd be surprised because these types of things they get shared hundreds of thousands of times. And they get millions of views. So those advertisements on those pages, and then residual clicks and this and that. I mean,
and only 1 out of like 10 maybe even has a photo credit, if that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's never underestimate the power of the public to be annoying. So.
Well, I'm gonna close this puppy up, our first video podcast. Thank you so much, David, for being
Great
part
to be
of
on
this.
camera.
Thank you, everybody, for coming
guys.
out. I'm so thrilled that people came out on a Friday at noon in New York City for a podcast like this. Hopefully, we had a few people online listening. And again, if you're watching this on YouTube, I encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube page.
Let me just say, davidburnett.com.
There you go.
Come on
no
down.
plugs.
Actually, I would be very interested to see if we get a little bit of a bump today.
Yeah. Check out davidburnett.com. Check out his agency. And then, one thing I want to make sure everyone that's here that came, thank you for coming. You guys can have 10% off anything in the store.
That's really a great
if you
deal
want to,
right
if you
there.
want to let them know that you're with me, with the Photo Brigade, with David, just let them know. I can also give you a little ticket or something that might make it a little more official. But that's just for today only. And so get out in the store and buy some goods. All right. And
a box of 25 sheets of HP5 4x5. Hey.
There you go.
Right.
So anyone else can go to photobrigade.com, davidburnett.com, at Photo Brigade on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Do you have the Instagram and stuff?
I was like the 4th guy to have an email account on AOL.
And you still have that account?
I still use it. I'm over the age of 50, therefore I can have an AOL account. You have to at least be 50. But I'm David B. 383, and I ended up using that as my Instagram. It has nothing to do with my name or anything. It's not like David Burnett Photo.
David B.
Twitter.
383.
I'm David B. 383, and I'm still spending my waning years trying to find the first 382 David B's, but I know they're out there somewhere.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.